Almost everybody loves stories about romance. Tales of fates crossing, disparate hearts being set aflutter, emotions heightening, quarrels intensifying, and all to eventually resolve in a climactic exchange of loving vows. It's one of the oldest genres and one whose contents speak deeply to how a society conceives of love and affection. Reading between the lines can reveal a lot about how the state of the world and those in power influence what we're willing to tolerate or even beautify in the name of coupling. Omega Star is one visual novel studio I'd primarily known for capturing the fluffier side without any of the exhausting baggage, mainly for their Kanojo series of games. They're cutesy, fun, and well put together visual novels with absolutely gorgeous artwork, and probably the most famous game Omega Star has ever made, thanks to some very popular adult anime adaptations that reached the West. Akano Free is just one of a few titles they've done, however, and what's come after is arguably a far more interesting series to dissect, because after 2 entries into making some heartwarming slice of life, they put all their resources and best talents into a different kind of romance. An anthology of stories within stories, glimpses at faraway worlds akin to yet different from our own, a kaleidoscopic journey. Bishoujo Mangekyou Norobarashi Densetsu no Shoujo, which I'll shorten to Noro Shoujo, is one of the most unexpectedly fascinating pieces of eroge that I've ever read. It's the tale of a generations-old vampiric tsundere who's long rejected her humanity, only to have her heart slowly reopened by a handsome, comically obsessive, and pathetic pervert teacher, pushing and pulling each other away until, eventually, realizing the love they share. All of this is framed as events occurring within a bizarro other world, peered into by a horror offer with the aid of a mysterious girl and her magical kaleidoscope, which left me a little bit weary of whether or not a single title in the series would make for a sufficient video. After all, it's an anthology of presumably bare-bones theming in each entry that exists just to set up some kinky coitus, so surely there can't be anything that complicated, right? In the literal text, not particularly. Noro Shoujo is a tale of 2 diametrically opposed people who embody some of the worst in humanity, realizing they have more in common than it first seems, spending ages going for the whole rigmarole of will they, won't they, interspersed with intercourse that gradually shifts away from delusions of love on one side and hate sex with a bratty vampire who needs to get her nutrients in on the other, into something more romantic as they open up. But as a romantic comedy built on the framework of famous works controversial and beloved alike, Noro Shoujo is interesting for highlighting the absurdity of love conquers all as a narrative device, and for how it otherwise perfects the nukige as a genre. The comical extremes of the emotions, the seeming complete detachedness our main couple has from human morality and sense, had me wondering something by the end credits. Just how far can love go, and how much are we as humans willing to tolerate in the name of it? And why is the idea of love so powerful that I can forgive all so tantalizing? Even if I'm unsure whether or not the game itself might be asking those questions, they are ones that I think are apt to explore through its lens, as well as to explore what makes good erotica capable of showing us ideas and concepts that we, in reality, probably don't want to engage with. As hot as this game is, though, it's not something I'd recommend getting sexual advice through. If you need that, then may I direct you to today's sponsor, Beducated? It might be unsurprising to hear from someone who reviews adult games for a living that I love sex, but there's no getting around the fact that erotic fiction, while a fun way to find out about new things, isn't exactly great for learning how to do those things. And finding good resources that explain the how-to inclusively in a way that feels welcoming to me as a non-op trans woman dating a cis man has been an uphill battle, which has left me feeling like I've hit a wall with things like my blowjob skills. And that is why I was excited when I learned about Beducated and was given the chance to partner up with them for this video. Beducated is an online platform containing over 100 detailed and sex-positive courses on how to spice up your couple's time in the bedroom. Whether that's learning how to eat someone out good, how to do a long, sensual night of intense roleplay, or even just some detailed refreshers on communication and consent. Each expert-designed course is wonderfully structured to be easy to watch and follow whether you're alone or with a partner, even if you don't know anything about what it's exploring, with a focus on safety, fun, and inclusivity. I particularly love the course on Aural for how it breaks down a lot of basic and more advanced techniques that I didn't quite have a grasp on, especially when it came to integrating butt play. And now I have the power and confidence to play with that while giving a suck. I also love Transcendent Bodies by Barbara Carreras for showing how a sensual massage can be an amazing way to learn about your partner's body, especially if they're trans or non-binary, but really any couple could benefit from what it shows. Heck, there's even resources on how those with disabilities can have fun, an important subject that often gets left out of discussions. Couple all that couples stuff with plenty for the singles and long-distance people out there too, and Beducated is the kind of one-stop shop for sex ed that I wish I had when I was figuring all all this stuff out for the first time. And it's why I'm happy to tell all of you that they're offering a 40% discount off the yearly pass just for viewers of this channel. By using my first name, Noel, as a code when signing up through my link, you'll get that sweet discount. And if you're on the fence, then fear not, as I offer a 24-hour trial and a 14-day money-back guarantee, but I'm pretty confident you'll love it just as much as I have. A huge thank you goes to Beducated for sponsoring this video. I've been looking for more sex-focused and positive sponsors for a while now, so I was elated when they wanted to partner up with me and give me the chance to show all of you the best sex resource I've found. So if there's anything you want to try with someone in the bedroom, or something you want to try on your own, or even if you just need hookup and dating advice, then go and check Beducated out and let them know that I sent ya. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into one of Omega Star's most beloved games and explore a world far away from our own, yet so close. Ghosts, ghouls, and apparitions of all shapes and sizes. Whether rooted in folk superstition or purely in the realm of fiction, humans are invariably fascinated and frightened by tales of beings far beyond their comprehension. Such is what up-and-coming horror author Natsuhiko Fukami hopes to capture in his career, which one day leads him to a hot spring rumored to contain a fortune in possessed dolls. Within the room those figures are held, however, is one mysterious girl, Renge. Clad in a kimono and as distant as she is intriguing, she finds herself captivated by Natsuhiko's curiosity with the fantastical and invites him to glance with her into a long, long dream, a reality hidden within the mysterious power of her treasured kaleidoscope. That reality is one that appears not so different from ours. At least that's how it seems to be for Shigehiko Onogami, a beloved music teacher at a religious all-girls school. Living the dream with immense wealth, incredible education, a fancy car, a beautiful apartment, and a respected job filled with young admirers, Shigehiko seems like he has his life made out, and he's dedicated to keep it that way. Until things suddenly change. Despite his vow to be the honorable and awesome man that he thinks he is and never come close to any of his students, there's one who's tempted him time and time again, Kirie Kagarino, a beauty who seems out of this time and simply won't leave his mind, with her cold disposition and aristocratic demeanor. When she one day fails to bring her parents to a mandatory teacher-parent day, Shigehiko takes it upon himself to request a home visit to speak with them, only to be led to a dark winding forest with a daunting gothic manor placed in the middle of it all. When he finally makes his way in, he's stunned to find her to be the only resident, and even more surprised when she reveals her trick. There never were any parents here, and her acceptance of his request was just a ploy to tease the truth out of him. He wants her like the pathetic man he is, and in turn, she's going to take him for herself as a meal to fill her 300-year-old vampire tummy with blood. Seminal fluids are fine too, though. Waking up the next day with a hazy memory and marks of fangs on his neck, Shigehiko miraculously survives the attack, despite her attempts to kill him and to hypnotize him into forgetting everything. With their encounter lingering in his weary mind, he's more desperate than ever to have his love fulfilled, a request he incessantly pleads to Kirie, who some days obliges him for her own needs, and at others rejects his request with a murderous fervor. But maybe there's something hidden in those feelings of her, perhaps behind that cold vampiric heart that time and time again zaps his life energy while telling him how worthless he is a human soul warmed by the foolish dedication of a broken man. Will the two find their own twisted love at the end of it all, or lead each other into destruction? Will Shigehiko end up an anemic and cumless husk to feed Kirie's emotionless pursuit of nutrients, or will Kirie meet her long-stalled death at the hands of an obsessive lover? And what will become of Natsuhiko's pursuits and the mysterious power Renge uses to aid him? Only time will tell, and for the cold mistress of the night, time is one resource that exists in abundance. Let me be totally clear. If you're expecting me to drop that Noto Shoujo has a top-tier storyline that takes everything I outline and goes into something like a wild, speculative sci-fi direction which reveals the world to be a post-apocalypse, maybe you want to go forward by 2 series entries? As it stands for the original Beamon, the story here never goes beyond what I've just described. This is, through and through, a comedically toxic romance between 2 awful people that exists primarily to lead to spicy sexual scenarios, but what makes the Beamon series so stand out amongst nukige is both the interesting framing device and the ways it chooses to tell its stories that explore what love might mean. Some games, like the latest, Yuki Onna, offer fun spins on Japanese folktales and incorporate topical humor and references, while others like Kamigatsukuri Tomoto Shoujo Dachi are the aforementioned post-apocalyptic science fiction. The series runs a gamut from real to surreal, and on that scale, Noto Shoujo falls much more on the former. Like, basically the only thing that's different here from Japan as we know it is that vampires exist and they're assholes, which is actually pretty close to reality. While it's stated that many others once existed, the only one that shows up for the story is Kirie Kagarino, turned into a bloodsucking relationship late teens, she's lived the past 300 years everywhere from Europe to Japan, as everything from a homeless bat to a Protestant nun, before finally settling in a completely non-conspicuous Gothic manor in a Japanese forest, recently deciding to enroll in private school for the correct reason, to get some tasty Yuri girl blood. She is also a smug, cold-hearted, gaslighting manipulator who ebbs from seductive to blindingly cruel to absurdly sweet to incredibly antisocial to incredibly needy and to downright murderous if the mood strikes her, if she even acknowledges she has all these moods, as she regularly denies her emotions as unnecessary, human-y things that get in the way of her vampiric life, while ironically engaging with very human emotions like rage. To her, humans should be nothing more than prey and fodder, which leads to an immense amount of internal turmoil as Shigehiko mindlessly pursues a romance with her despite not only her interpersonal apprehensions, but her ingrained disdain for anything deemed characteristic of the lower species. In this case though, her hatred may be justified when it's against Shigehiko. Born to a family wealthy from oil and growing up sheltered with an immense education and few friends, Shigehiko Onogami is your typical rich boy who compensates for the emptiness in his life with luxury, finding a facsimile of emotional fulfillment with his prized Jaguar sports car and soaking in all of the attention he gets from his students. He is, in every way, the stereotype of a sleazy, immature, handsome rich man that bathes in narcissism and power, down to the very childish ways he responds to not getting what he wants. Whenever that persona of a collected, reliable teacher breaks, he's quick to yell and shout and push others around, and while that would work in most circumstances, the one who coaxes that out of him here is a literal vampire. Despite still being a human, his moral compass is about as far off as Kirie's is, just with significantly less pessimism than her. She sees humans as inferior beings that should bow down to her and has never been made to face the consequences of it, and he sees it as normal to objectify, fetishize, and obsess over the people in his life, including his students, because he's never been made to face the consequences of it. The two are equally toxic people in different ways that all stem from being completely out of touch with most of humanity and refusing to engage with it since their high social power and class doesn't require them to. It's an interesting reinvention of the classic literary parallels between vampires and the rich. The two are equally detached from everybody socially below them, but Kirie has the added power of literal blood-sucking. In the end, both of them are people who give off an air of decadence and sophistication, but don't need more than a cursory glance to find that they have no genuine regard for those below them. Whatever these two do to each other, no matter how violent, they are always going to recover in a way that a would-be couple with a serious power disparity and less atypical sense of morality on one side can't. All of this makes them weirdly compatible with each other. No matter how much Kirie denies her feelings for Shigehiko or gaslights or manipulates or even attempts to kill him, he is so firmly grounded in this idea of fantastical true love that he just sees her toxicity as an obstacle in love that needs to be gotten over. And that insistence forces her to confront that she is, deep down, still a human despite her vampiric powers, which makes no realistic sense. You cannot guy boss someone into loving you, but it doesn't need to because these are unrealistic characters. Much of the humor of the game comes from this unstoppable force meets immovable object dynamic. The game constantly finds new ways for Shigehiko to get own zoned and for Kirie to get comically mad at something as small as an earnest compliment, escalating into moments like her riding him while he drives his car at night, forcing him to go at full speed until they both climax and crash into a guardrail, and then she scolds him for his failing and being sad that his Jaguar got damaged. The ridiculous lengths of the game can go reminds me in ways of what we do in the shadows, just horny.
I became a vampire to suck blood and to fuck forever.
Both series play on the comedy of incompetent, morally inhuman figures, mainly vampires, doing absurdly terrible things for terrible reasons with terrible reactions. But while that show's humor often comes from how the real world and the average Joe characters conflict with and balance out the mayhem of a bunch of old vampires, Noto Shoujo does all this without any counteractive force besides the reader's sense of reality. The result is pure mayhem and drama, which works as well for jokes as it does for running that core push and pull of feelings which romance novels live and die with the ferocity of a particle accelerator made by CERN. You never know if Kirie is going to do Shigehiko in for good, if he's gonna realize the futility of his quest and give up, or if the two will just legitimately push through it all to find love. Being a love story, the obvious answer is the third, but to maintain that illusion of possibility is a commendable aspect of a good writer. It is a literal life and death game of romantic tug-of-war, and while none of the drama that results from that is deep or highly thought-provoking, it's more of an entertaining and compelling enough to keep the story going along as the two learn from each other's most violent and toxic emotions, and in ways mellow out, each making decisions that seem believable within the context of their very misaligned moral compasses. By most people's standards, leading a guy along to use them for your own gain before threatening to murder him would be horrible, and sticking with that person because of a sense of cosmic true love would be nonsensical, as is obsessing over that person to the point of basically stalking them in the first place, but all of the lead up and aftermath here is framed in such a way that saying this would be bad in reality feels unnecessary. And the fact the game can instill this caveat so effortlessly in its readers through clever character development and framing without glorifying and minimizing the effects of abuse is why it's able to stay in the realm of comedy rather than apologia. I have talked time and time again on this channel about my experiences with being abused, both in relationships and with family. Some of my favorite games I've covered are precisely about this, some exploring them honestly and empathetically like White Album 2, and others with more mixed results and not exactly a favorite of mine like Monakashi. But up to this point, all the games I've covered at least try to be serious due to the severity of the topic, and that's why Shoujo fascinates me so much. Humor in reasonable quantity is as much an effective coping mechanism as catharsis is in reasonable quantity, because it can serve to lessen how daunting something is in our minds by pointing to the absurdity present in even many awful things. Like, for as many times as I've had incidents of abuse against me triggered by some legitimately awful shit, sometimes it was something as goofy as disagreeing about a Nintendo 64 game or daring to read Karl Marx. Truly horrifying, inhumanitarian offenses. The impact of what those led to, being yelled at and insulted and belittled and even threats of violence, aren't any less horrible just because of what caused them, nor is how they were excused as just a roadblock that unconditional love can solve. And it helps to read something that validates these things aren't normal, they're immature and absurd and awful, but there can still be laughs had over them when reminiscing. Ultimately, this framing of everything that happens in the game as being non-cataclysmic by the character's intersection of power, immorality, absurdity, and abstraction allows it to stay comedic. The joke in how even absurdly terrible things are played straight works because the author is well aware of the bit that's being written, the implications of it, and the framing necessary to keep it from being minimizing. And that makes it succeed where a lot of taboo erotic fiction fails. Framing in erotic fiction is just as important as the raw contents and the protected contents. Whether you describe an act as consensual or dubiously so, pleasurable or painful, soft or rough, and countless other factors, they affect how we view it in the context of the characters, and subsequently, how we expect those characters to react. Put another way, the circumstances of a blowjob matter as much as the blowjob, and I don't think there's any better example of a failure to frame within pop culture than the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy. What 50 Shades wants to be is an erotic thriller about power and desire. The plot wants to be taken seriously as a tantalizing story of BDSM, control, and love, and judging by its incredible sales and rave reviews from pent-up housewives, definitely seems like it achieved that part for some. Whether that's just because the US consciousness is so starved for eroticism that even a lead-tainted drop of water tastes like a wonderful mixed drink, or because people genuinely find Erica Mitchell's writing erotic, I have no idea, but both make me sad to consider. 50 Shades falls apart because Mitchell's writing has a massive dissonance between the content of her writing and the framing of it. Acts that are described by the main man Christian are framed as erotic and caring, if perhaps a bit boundary pushing for our main heroine and everyday girl Anastasia, but they're pretty blatantly littered with misogyny, sexism, domestic abuse, manipulation, and control, things which the series only ever pays lip service to being problems. All of it is swept under the rug by the messaging of true love and he was traumatized so it's okay, which just leaves us with a main woman who is narratively without agency, and a main man who's just made a couple boo-boos on his way to loving the girl right. I'm not saying stories have a responsibility to tell the viewer something is right or wrong, but fiction does impact how people think about things and how they act, and I think it's fair to ask that stories don't actively say abuse is okay. You can write people in unapologetically fucked up relationships as a way to explore social issues. You can write it because toxicity involves intense, vulnerable emotions that are psychologically addicting and therefore interesting to explore from a safe distance. You can write people being unresolved messes for any number of reasons, just because you find it hot. But if it's not just your broken characters, but you as the author who is saying that abuse is value neutral if not good, then you need to rethink your work and your beliefs. If 50 Shades was written with the knowledge that its character dynamics were toxic, then we'd have a very different story. One with a female lead who has actual agency and intelligence, and a male lead who isn't forgiven of a couple of kisses and a sob story about his mother, the crack whore, that made him like to whip little brown-haired girls to feel powerful. What the fuck? So bad it made my phone fall off. Jesus Christ. That reality is something we have a glimpse into, thanks to its first film adaptation doing its damnness to change things, as explained in immense detail by Folding Ideas' full video series on the film and book trilogy. I have no doubt I've paraphrased them by accident in this segment by virtue of having seen those videos so many times and them being influential for me, and I cannot recommend them enough if you want to understand better just how erotic and romantic fiction can crash with a bad driver. But suffice to say, there's a lot of problems with both the novels and the films, and the issues provide a look into why Shoujo works. The VN is filled with dubious consent, toxic dynamics, and generally a lot of things that get swept past which are unforgivable and traumatizing to real people or realistic characters, but it's explicit that none of this is particularly realistic. It ends up akin to a rigorously designed sexual roleplay scenario, even down to each character having their own nope button to turn the tide in a matter of seconds. Kirie can turn into a bat or mist or just outright make Shigehiko anemic for blood absorption, and Shigehiko has Catholic charms that temporarily weaken Kirie. Those escapes are integrated so well into the story that you hardly even consider them as escapes while you're in the heat of a steamy scene, but their presence is known and matters, just as much as your ability as a player to hit the escape or control key matters. It also all works together to allow us to see toxicity for what it is, enjoy the drama and intense emotions that follow suit as just fun fiction, but not treat it as something normal, something forgivable. And that speaks immensely to Kichijoji's writing talents. If you've never heard of Kichijoji Dolores before, I don't blame you because it's a pseudonym exclusive to this series. Whether you look them up on the English or Japanese web, all you're going to find is references back to these games without a hint of any bibliography besides them or interviews to enlighten production details, which is kind of a shame because it's clear they've had to refine these chops over the years. As a writer, I don't think there's any particular quirks or tendencies that make Kichijoji stand out, at least not in this particular entry. They don't really tend towards purple prose, have an especially unique way of writing characters, or structure their stories in any particularly unorthodox way. What they have, and what I think is equally important as any special quirk, is a really good grasp on writing fundamentals like defining characters. Regardless of whether they get 20 or 200 minutes of screen time, everyone from Natsuhiko to Kirie is compelling and distinctly different in how they interact with those around them. And that's doubly impressive given how many are clearly paying off thoroughly developed archetypes but veer into captivating directions rather than doing the bare minimum and rehashing tropes. Even from the beginning, you can feel of how stark the contrast is between Natsuhiko's POV and Shigehiko's. Both of them have completely different ways of processing the world, with the former being far more observant and reserved as one might expect from a calculating offer, while the latter is distinctly not that or any potentially positive trait. While I reviewed some nukige of poetic prose, this is not one of them because Shigehiko is not the kind of character to deliver it, and the game almost never switches away from his perspective once it enters it. It shows in full clarity how immature he is despite attempting to appear otherwise, bouncing from calm and self-aggrandizing to childish and obsessive within seconds. It never stops being amusing though, because when he's reading like an average VN protagonist, he's being average about not average things, and when he's depraved and stupid, his thoughts are spoken or fought with a ridiculous gravitas, childishly whimsical, waxing about his love for Kitty and how perfect and beautiful she is in a way that's both not nearly as deep as he thinks it is, and is somehow pathetic and endearing at the same time. And just in case you might get used to his narration late in the game, it again reminds you how bizarre it is when you're given a brief glimpse into Kirie's mind, and her prose is written in a way that feels a lot more thoughtful and calculated than the typical train of thought you see in VN writing. It brings to light the conflict between her vampiric and human sides in a manner that I kind of wish we got to see more of. What all of this inevitably exists in service to, though, is creating build-up for and context to the game's adult content, which takes up something like 2/3 of its runtime. There's a total of 15 scenes spread across 5.5 hours, containing 20 distinct acts and CG sets, running through not only what you'd expect from a hetero game, suckies, strokies, paizuri, missionary for the sole purpose of procreation, but various forms of femdom and all special attention paid to toying with power dynamics. Who's on top or bottom at any given time is all dependent on who initiates, who's playing the better mind games, and who actually has the fortitude to speak while being lost in pleasure. Like the romance they find themselves slowly entering, their dynamics are always ebbing and flowing in ways that keep things not just fresh, but exciting, working in tandem with dialogue and prose that builds on inherently interesting situations. Even the most contemporary act is elevated for this, which, as a reminder, if you also want to up your power play and sexy dialogue game, video sponsor Beducated has courses on that. Use code Noel for 40% off a year, and they give you a 24-hour trial period and a 14-day money-back guarantee. It is a way better resource for all that than this game. Do not trust your eroge for sex ed, friends. Trust Beducated. One of my favorite scenes comes late in the game where Kirie ties Shigehiko up and mounts him while wrapping his member around in a thin string to prevent him from pewing as she does what she pleases. Conceptually, that's already great given the kind of character Shigehiko is. He's someone who desires and even fights for control, wrestling it away from Kirie as early as the second adult scene, and now he's made completely unable to change the tides. Kirie constantly teases Shigehiko about how much he's enjoying the submission, calling him names and degrading him as he shows clear signs of pleasure from it, which he denies. It's all very typical femdom stuff executed particularly well with an ear for dirty talk, and then she herself starts going delirious in excitement from all the different sensations and stimuli, both physical and mental. Suddenly, she's in a much less lucid and aware state, riding off the high of pleasure and control, and while this would be a perfect moment for Shigehiko to reverse everything, he can't. And that paradox of being dominated by someone who is on top, begging for pleasure like she does when she's on bottom, who is in a perfect mindset to enjoy submission even more, makes for a delightfully contradictory set of circumstances because it truly demonstrates how little power he has in that moment. For Shigehiko, this strong man with incredible social power who could throw his weight around, to be dominated and humiliated by someone physically smaller who herself is failing to keep a straight face with no recourse. That is just a flatly hot inversion of power, and the text hones in on this. Everything from the emotions to the textural sensations are captured in writing just as well as they are in the art. It is plainly good erotica writing, and that is difficult. The basic scenario is already interesting because it's a neat play on power dynamics, enhanced by being written with a deep understanding of what each character desires and how to invert it. It keeps the dynamics fresh by constantly altering the parameters without changing the core, and it is brilliantly paced, as are all of the other scenes. Now, pacing in erotica is a funny thing. There's a common joke that men can't write eros more complicated than stick pee in hole, and women always write with luscious, detailed, sensual, and verbose prose, often made with the connotation that the latter is innately better. And while I'm not going to unequivocally defend the former, especially in the context of sex scenes in general media where men who identify as cis men tend to write them poorly, I think this notion of simplicity bad, verbosity good is extremely reductive. There is incredible importance to making clear to the reader just what's going on, what the situation is, and what the stakes are, but all of that takes time, and sometimes you want that. Spending a lot of words on telling the reader the specific sensation of specific texture, the stimuli of a certain spot, can help them to understand what feels good and why and where, and identify with the characters, especially if they themselves lack a point of reference or aren't especially into that particular thing. Sex is notoriously complicated, with a number of physiological, psychological, and sociological factors impacting why any given thing feels good, and it's important for an author to be able to convey those in depth where the depth is needed. Even in the most socially codified and scripted forms of it, like consensual sexu and the missionary position for the sole purpose of procreation, it's a dynamic act that has peaks and valleys in intensity. Detailed information is as much a tool to inform the viewer as it is a method of pacing, because conveying specifics requires time, and 2 paragraphs about the jolt of pleasure from a touch of a woman's finger probably doesn't work as well when both characters are sloppily slapping their tits against each other as it does when they're essentially building each other up. You as a writer have to know where to reduce density, and at least for me, as someone who mostly deals in first-person erotica, there are a lot of ways that it's possible. Characters suddenly shifting tone, the usage of expletives, the slurring of speech, a couple well-placed moans, these and many others are tools in the writer's toolkit that take varying amounts of space, explain varying things in varying ways, and are important to use carefully for the sake of keeping the viewer in the emotional state you want them in. Sometimes it is really hot when a character's mind is so far gone that all they can process is stick pee in hole. Kishijoji in every single scene demonstrates a firm understanding of this. There is no dead air, dullness, or wasted space within the text. Things are given the level of detail necessary to make it possible for you to imagine and understand the sensations the characters are feeling, which may sometimes mean multiple lines about a particular tactile sensation, or easily parsable fragments about a good nerve twitch interspersed between bouts of teasing. Things are always proceeding forward in a way that feels predictably unpredictable. You know that you don't know where anything will lead unless you've read the game before, which makes the abrupt shifts in the waves of pleasure as powerful to you as they are to those experiencing them in the fiction. It also helps there is a lot of subtle dirty talk that's both legitimately interesting and builds characters in subtle ways. Kichijoji being excited by being called a pervert isn't just fun because of his masochism, it puts him off guard because he expects no acknowledgement of his perversion from other people, and it creates openings for Kirie to pierce through and develop new dynamics. And Kirie being simultaneously bashful yet audibly turned on when her feelings of pleasure are acknowledged are in this case, rather than a rehash of the idea that women are dishonest but their bodies aren't, instead highlights her difficulty with accepting her human feelings and desires as they contrast with her vampiric side that says she can't have those, and it even leads to her dominant streak vanishing in the thin air. Breaking it all down like this probably makes it sound like this writing is so brilliant and punctual that it's impossible to perceive it as erotic as you read it, so allow me to dispel that by saying I went through this entire game in one sitting and started having what felt like the start of heart palpitations halfway through. The brilliance in it all is that you don't think of this while you're reading. There is never attention called to any of it. It is just subtle good writing. And these particular aspects of subtle good writing are fundamentals of doing erotica, but they're fundamentals that are extremely challenging to grasp, both because sex is really hard to write about, and because writing about it well requires being vulnerable and honest for a long enough time to develop the skills to portray your desires in a way that that sincerely captures what excites you. The fact this game works as well as it does is a miracle to me, though it definitely wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for the art working in tandem. Art Jin is one of the few artists in eroge to have reached truly legendary status in my mind, even if his name might not be well known as those like Takeuchi of Type Moon or Sayori of Nekopara. Part of the reason he holds that status in my mind is because I have had multiple games recommended to me entirely on the grounds of him working on them as opposed to anybody else, which is how I was led to Kanojo and Omega Star in the first place. However, before that release, Jin hopped around from company to company, starting from the final days of NEC's PC98 era and continuing to the present day, the time when the IBM PC architecture has taken over the global computing market, besides the thing that powers your smartphone, ARM. Until the mid-2000s, most of his artwork mimicked whatever was popular at the time, with his own styling slowly developing in the background, and they are unremarkable at best. Sans retracing his artistic lineage up through the point where he came to his own in CrossNet Pi's 2004 release Resort Bullying, and solidified in the first game by Omega Star, one of CrossNet's splinter companies following their demise. Kano Free represents a mastery of the 2000s anime aesthetic mixed with interesting techniques unique to Jin, which would finally reach a peak with Noto Shoujo that has only gotten taller with time and shows no signs of decline. Because even if we put the erotic aspects of the game aside, there's no denying at all that this is a gorgeous title in every single way, and all of that is owed to how well Jin is able to execute his style, one focused on layering simplistic details perfected as opposed to outright complexity. The least technical way I can demonstrate this is with the fashions, such as the outfit of Haru Inamori, the keeper of the inn that Hideshiko is staying at. What could have been a normal yukata with no pattern at all or a very gaudy one is instead given little subtle flourishes, lightly colored hearts strategically placed throughout in a gold sheen to the fabric edges that make it distinct without going to any extremes, complementing the color of her hair subtly tied to a ponytail. Nothing from her proportions to her fashion decisions stand out as absurd in any way. All of it blends together seamlessly into something that's distinct, real, and immediately comprehensible, and that applies to, well, basically every character. Like, Kirie's personal wear goes a step further in the unfamiliarity, but is very clearly built out of aspects present in Gothic Lolita fashion, remixed in ways that feel unique but grounded. The imposing dark and red color scheme, the lace, the mesh, the use of crosses, the poofy shoulders, the corset-esque waist piece, the subtle layering with hints of colors complementary to the two primary, these are all common fashion aspects performed here in their very Lolita form, but arranged and employed in such a way that this feels equally in line with actual Victorian fashion as it does the wear of a stylish woman in Shinjuku. The clever balancing between familiar realities and fictional twists gives the art a coherent design language that you don't ever really double take at, and thus it has enough leeway for something as absurd as Kirie's mantle, meant to resemble stereotypical vampire wear, to feel like an actual article of clothing sensible within the game's world and not just an unrealistic bit of pseudocloth. What's equally as admirable is a desire to, and success with, making pleasure something visual as opposed to only oral and linguistic. And that's weirdly huge because eroge artists have a noted problem with thinking that expressions of pain are totally suitable expressions of pleasure, which at best comes off awkwardly, and at worst is reflective of how intercourse is often conceptualized for women as innately painful, especially for virgins. I'm not gonna deny that penetration is sometimes unintentionally ouchy-oofy, but it can be minimized if not outright eliminated through prep and patience. Fiction doesn't even have a need to demonstrate this. Doing so not only often creates a weird dissonance, but makes some scenes in games that could be hot feel awkward in a way they're clearly not intended to be, unless you're buying wholesale into the mainstream narratives about plappin'. Jin's art, however, gets that feeling good, feels good. There are subtle smiles, there's drool, there are winks, there is surprise, there is affection, there is playfulness, there is anything and everything that changes fluidly with the situation, yet never loses this sense of electrifying pleasure. A conveyance through look alone that it feels good, and that is important for elevating the visuals of this visual novel beyond just being an accompaniment to the writing. What stunned me above all else, however, was the attention given to anatomical detail. While there are a couple of CGs that feel a bit off, most aim to be accurate while still maintaining some sense of anime stylization. Almost everything in this game is possible to do without displacing your ribs, and almost everything demonstrates an astounding amount of proportional consistency across scenes, which is not easy to do when you have a title with as many angles and positions as this. I think to best demonstrate this, we need to talk about breasts. They're famously one of the most difficult things to get right for artists without them because they don't really work how people think they would. For one, they don't protrude off the center of the chest, but are connected to the major pectoralis muscles around the chest and the shoulder through ligaments, thus forming a teardrop shape where the center mass tapers up into the various tissues that connect them to the shoulders. The squishy part though, the actual breast, is a collection of fat, milk-facilitating lobules, and some supporting tissues. How that fat is distributed is as much a part of the shape they have as everything surrounding them, and the fact they are primarily flat in their center mass is what makes them so squishy. It's also what makes it possible to shape them in ways that give the illusion of a larger size. For less boobyful women, playing with this can make or break specific acts. Paizuri may be impossible in the natural shape you have, but by grabbing from the bottom and the sides, it is possible to collect enough surrounding fats and tissues together to give an illusion of size, and produce a specific shape that appears large enough to engulf the phallic and gorgy of noted interest for stimulation. All of this is to say that breasts are not just squishy fun bags, but malleable masses of tissues and organs that connect to neighboring parts of the body in complex ways that don't immediately seem clear. And all of that is preamble, so you can hopefully share my enthusiasm when I saw a Paizuri scene, or more accurately, an Aizuri scene, in the game that reflects everything I just mentioned. Kirie's small chest appears bigger than we've seen before entirely by virtue of redistributing mass through pressure, and the physical results of this are laid clear. You can tell from the way the areola are pointed and how her palms are cusping from a specific angle that her chest hasn't magically grown larger in this image. It's just booby magic that stays consistent with the appearance of it in other CGs. As a certified petanco, I think there's just as much beauty in this kind of realistically inspired anatomy as there is an anatomy which breaks all conventions. In the same way, it takes immense dedication to be willing to understand fashion on the level necessary to make a cohesive look out of disparate aesthetics. It takes immense dedication to understand anatomy on this level to be able to manage such fine details. And that detail is what ultimately makes Jin's very soft style work. In all of his art, there is this constant softness that prevails through everything and blends it all together. You'll see striking colors and contrast, and you'll see the occasional bit of exaggeration for funsies and fucksies, but there's a core ethos that makes all of this come together and feel soft, pliable, gentle, yet still real material. I ended up poring over a number of CGs of a good artist friend of mine to get a better idea of what this ethos is, and the conclusion Faye and I came to is his preference for shading to create depth and texture rather than line art, which he renders as unobtrusive as he possibly can, rarely thicker than a hair, with colors chosen to blend in with the object it's lining. The shading and rendering then, few in tones and gradient, pulling from Western art styles and the techniques of 3D geometry as much as it does from contemporary anime, fills in the blanks that cartoonish line art would otherwise have to strike in. It makes everything feel as if it's without a harsh edge, but not without contrast and friction, and the combination of stylings lead to something that is simultaneously very anime while still being very grounded in reality in more familiar and realistic styles. Light and shadow bounce off naturally, muscle and definition is created through subtle brushstrokes, attention is subtly drawn through particularly striking contrast and tone, and so forth. All of it creates detail with as little complexity or jaggedness to the eyes as possible, which makes the few aspects of the art that are more aggressive visually, such as the eyebrows and the way hair gathers together in dense ways, stand out more and add very welcome contrast and exaggeration. There is so much mastery over the various fundamentals and styles incorporated here that it's easy to overlook the other impressive bits. Besides the anatomy, you also have the ways that ambient lighting realistically affects environments and divides scenes, or just coats them in gorgeous hues. You have the cinematography of each CG, how they're each framed with a perfect mind for what to show and what to hide, in order to force players to imagine while still giving them enough of what they want. Even the backgrounds, a part of visual novels which often get relegated to aesthetically incoherent 3D renders straight out of the Voodoo graphics era, are painted with stunning detail, brilliant architecture that's at times threatening and at others serene, sterile, dated, or downright gorgeous, giving a strong sense of location distinct from any other game with an aesthetic cohesion to boot. The game even goes as far as to have honest-to-God real animation that doesn't suck even when it's showing a suck, which was a rarity back in 2011 and I still think beats a lot of what's coming out now despite its imperfections. There is some jank with the timing of physics feeling ever so slightly off, as well as some stiffness in the movements here and there, but it is perfectly workable and rather impressive. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Jin actually draws the faces of men in the games he works on. I'm still continually baffled at how many eroge refuse to show men, as if the guys reading the games will get boy cooties or something. But even back in 2008 with Kono Free, he was willing to do so while making him hot. And it's the same deal here. Shigehiko is appealing in a way that significantly enhances the quality of any given ero scene. All of this is to say that Jin's style is very much my shit to a T, and a wonderful take on contemporary anime art stylings. It is soft, flowy, and beautiful. It is anatomically grounded with a willingness to play around here and there. It's very erotic, and it's got a sense for fashion that makes me want to go out and buy a whole new wardrobe. I can't exactly give higher praise than that. Also of great importance is the fact this game runs on an engine that isn't a nightmare to work with. Developed by Warmth Entertainment, Hewley has support for a wide variety of resolutions with a number of excellent scaling solutions, including crunchy pixels, and has some wild black magic that makes it play nice with recording software even if you tab between full screen and windowed. Overall, it's the good shit, and it'll run without requiring Aurelion enchant. Unfortunately, it's a little bit hard for me to be as enthusiastic about the voice acting. It is not bad, far from, but rather because this game suffers from the disease of the main guy isn't voiced-itis, which has been sweeping eroge for decades. Normally, this doesn't bother me too horribly, but it feels really odd here of Shigehiko being both a very defined character and one of only two for most of the title's duration. With the exception to very minor background characters and those in the framing device, Aoba Ringo is left to carry the show alone as Kirie, which might be enough to forgive everything I just mentioned. Manaka Nemu in Euphoria, Benkei and Eiyu Senki, Maya in Nobleworks, Kanaede and Teardrops. She is one of the best VAs in the industry, so it's high praise when I say her performance as Kirie stands out as a highlight in her career. She captures her character perfectly. The smugness, the seduction, the human core, the cruel lashing out, the stark tonal shifts, all with an amazing flow that never once has her skipping a beat, nor makes you feel like you're just listening to a performance. I legitimately cannot imagine anybody else capturing her character better. I also don't want to leave the other cast members in the dust. Despite their short appearances, both Fukata Sakiko as the innkeeper Haru and channel favorite VA Sakurai Harumi as Renge do a stellar job with the handful of lines they're given. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the best VA in all this though, the guy who plays Kirie's zombie butlers. Something that actually really surprised me going in though was the fact that the music matched up with the quality of the VA. It was composed by Munyan and Akiyama Hirokazu, both of whom are probably best known for, well, this series, or in the case of the latter, as a somewhat popular source of Japanese royalty-free music. As far as I can tell though, his credit here is for original compositions, and not for anything pulled off his website. Coming in at 16 tracks total, Noto Shoujo's soundtrack is a mixture of contemporary VN stylings with the odd gothic harpsichord motif thrown in, all highly inspired and creative in their composition. Like, take a listen to Tuki no Kuchibue, or Whistle for a Moonlit Night. It's got this snappy 3/4 piano beat with a sort of shuffling sound for the rhythm section, a gentle xylophone adding some high notes to the piece, and a beautiful flute drenched in reverb that trades in and out with a soft oboe. As a piece of game music, it's kinda perfect. It's beautifully simple and unobtrusive, creating a beautiful image through audio when taken as an individual piece of music, while still slotting into the art and writing in a way that creates a coherent atmosphere where all the individual bits inform each other. The rest of the music is like this too, no matter who composed it, which is, and this is a big compliment, really hard to tell apart. This game has a very cohesive sound aesthetic just as it has a cohesive aesthetic everywhere else. And speaking of hard things and erection joke, I think it's finally time to take a moment and tie everything I've been talking about up to this point together and answer the question, why am I spending all of this time talking about all this meta stuff to visual novels with this particular game as the lens for which I'm doing so? Why is all of this stuff about sex and romance and art so important to me? While there will be ending spoilers in this coming segment, I don't think there should be any apprehension in watching it if you want to play the game, because as a nukige without much plot focus, all of the experiences within watching the adult scenes unravel for yourself. Still though, if you want to see everything for yourself, then skip ahead to the ending segment where I give my final thoughts. But not before sticking around for a quick Patreon break where I thank all the donors and patrons who make videos like these possible and shout out some cool people that you should check out. Howdy y'all, and welcome to the Patreon segment. It's that time of the video to give channel updates, life updates, shout out cool things, and give thanks to all the donors and patrons that make content like this possible. For the first of those, I'm really happy to report the Kusari Hime video has been a huge success. So in general, I'm not super concerned with analytics, but after the Extravaganza and White Album 2 videos performed well under the last few I'd done, it was really nice to see Kusari Hime shoot up to being the third most successful video here in its opening weeks. I was really anxious while working on it if I gotten tons of things wrong or if my analysis was at all interesting even, so it was heartwarming to see it so beloved. Thank you all so much. And for life updates, well, the reason this video wasn't as big as I wanted and didn't get done as quick as I wanted and why I sound stuffy right now is because I got struck by a horrible flu for over a week of production. I managed to finish the game, and then I got some really rough drafting of the script done, and then for the past week as I'm writing this, I've had constant migraines, a fever, serious fatigue, and a generally deficient will to do anything but sleep. I want to sleep so bad. The good news is, though, that it's on the up and up. I don't feel dead right now, so hopefully I'll be fine and back to normal next month? God, I hope so. Either way, I have to to, again, extend a big thanks to my patrons for showing as much support and understanding as they do, and most importantly, making it possible for me to live off producing these videos. We have been hovering stably around 2,000 USD for a while now, and I am seriously amazed at the generosity on display with that and just how much interest there is in coverage of a niche game genre like this. Like, it sticks in my mind that I talked about one of my videos only hitting like 15K in its first couple of weeks, and I post about that, and the friend is like, wow, 15K for an Eroge video being bad is a different fucking reality than we used to live in. So yeah, the amount of success I have is something that is extremely humbling, extremely hard for me to imagine, and makes me extremely happy. So again, thank you all so much. And to do as I always try to do and give back to the community that makes this possible, I'd like to shout out some cool people I've stumbled upon, viewers who've pitched their work, and neato things I've been informed of. So if you too would like a chance of being shouted out, then feel free to drop me a line on Tumblr, Twitter, my Patreon DMs, or even my email. I am always looking for cool new people to shout out. The first I'd like to shout out is Vivian Strange, who runs a channel where she dives into media, philosophy, and the politics of varying sorts. I was actually recommended her by a viewer of mine who specifically suggested her video on Marquis de Sade, one of the most controversial figures in the history of sex, yet one who is still yet to get even close to the amount of scholarship they deserve. Vivian's video on him does an absurdly commendable job at making up for that lack. It is brilliantly researched, highly topical, smartly personal, and all around a deeply moving examination in a kind of way I hope to bring to this platform and want to see in others. If you at all enjoy my discussions about taboo and the history of art and history and just anything I talk about, you have to see this in her other videos. And if at all possible, I really recommend donating to her Patreon. She deserves far more than the small amount she's getting right now, and at the very least, it deserves your attention. The second I want to shout out is Niche Caesar, who makes videos examining and discussing film, but the one that stood out to me the most is his video on how films get visually changed in the process of going from theater to home. Videotech and the technical side of film is a special interest of mine, and I'll eat up pretty much anything about it so long as it's good, and his work very much is. It is well edited, well voiced over, and breaks down some potentially very complex information in a way that pretty much anyone can understand, while also making it clear why film restoration and preservation matters, something that I think is particularly important in an era where we're seeing sloppy machine learning restorations of iconic films. So if you've ever wanted to understand the how and why behind films getting tinted and cropped and altered in other ways for releases and how it matters, then check that video out and maybe the rest of his works while you're at it too. And with those two, hopefully, and other tabs to check out, I'd like to go and answer some Patreon Q&As. So, ikimashou! Yurigasaki asks, how do you select anime clips for your video B-roll? It's one of the most characteristic parts of your videos, and I always enjoy seeing what you pick. Is there any kind of process, or is it just vibes? So basically, and this is gonna sound kind of ridiculous, I just search emotion here, anime gif on Google, and dig around until I find something I haven't used or haven't used in a long time and fits the vibe I'm going for with a segment. Then I use trace.moe, which is a godsend of a website, to find its origin, get a copy of its origin, and edit it to use in this video. The fact I'm going off of Google is why there's such a variety of sources, because only once in a blue moon I'll actually pull from anime I've seen and written down notes myself of, because, well, I only really watch anime in my downtime, and I don't want to take notes on where funny reaction gif 25 is while I'm actively avoiding thinking about my job. Caleb Sayans asks, what's a mistake you think a lot of first-time VN developers make, whether it be in the realm of common writing pitfalls, bad advertising, neglected technical aspects, etc.? For Western VN developers specifically, it's definitely the we're not like the other games marketing shtick. It is incredibly disrespectful, and in many cases have a xenophobic twist about how icky and weird Japan is. In general though, the first is just way underestimating how much effort visual novels take to make. Like, a lot of people seem to think like, oh, they're less complicated games than other games. No, absolutely not. You are going to get yourself hammered with work if you decide you can just make some spanning epic because no bro, I don't have to develop gameplay. Cypress asks, have you ever considered Kaleidoscope Shoujo? I have, but it would be a massive undertaking because I want to do a proper dive into its history and influence. I also think the game itself is alright at best, and I don't want to incite the feverish wrath of the 5 people who still post on Kaleidoscope Shoujo general. Seriously, how the fuck are those Anons still posting after all this time? Hayes asks, I was wondering if you ever thought about covering Key's other works like Air or Higurashi. Air is definitely a title I want to dive into at some point since it isn't hellishly long, and I'd also just like to get back into the world of Key in general. But Higurashi, which, quick correction, is Bio 7th expansion and not Key, is both extremely long and has one of the most outsized legacies in all of visual novels. If I do a Higurashi video, it'll probably cost me my sanity, but it might be worth it. Alrighty then, with everything said and done, it's about that time to start closing off the section. Once again, a massive thanks goes to the donors who make this work possible as my main job, and who keep me able to sustain myself even as I enter new chapters of my life. If it weren't for y'all, I wouldn't be where I am right now, close to my boyfriend and in a much happier place than I used to live in, and that's had an unstateable impact on me feeling genuinely happy most of the time. I really can't thank you all enough. And if you would like to help make these videos possible, have your name scroll on the side like all these cool people, see these videos without cuts, sometimes watch them early, get monthly updates, suggest games, and other neato things, then consider supporting my work on Patreon or Ko-fi monthly or one time via the latter. The minimum is $1 US, and all content is accessible by any amount. Pay what you want, if you want. And if you don't want to, that's totally okay too. Liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing is incredibly important to making these videos possible, and I don't at all want to undervalue how much that does. Just simply knowing that people are watching and enjoying these works makes me feel fulfilled and gives me the inspiration to keep going, so again, I appreciate y'all so much, and let's get back to the show. Given that this is a nukige without much plot, this spoiler segment is going to be less of me recounting the story in detail, thematic ideas highlighted, and more just me talking about how this title made me reflect on sex and romance. Without looking far beyond the work itself, I wouldn't really have much to pull from, and that's odd for a nukige on this channel. Usually, whenever I dive into them, it's because the game utilizes its sexual content in a thematically captivating and unique way. Tasaku, for instance, uses Guro to highlight how womanhood is an artificial and malleable construct among other topics. Yaminoko is loaded with wacky sex to show how almost everybody has kinky and queer desires, and how a safe space to explore those can be a vital part of learning to accept oneself. Shinmiyuku is about finding hope within the most dire of times, and how human kindness and bonds can give us the energy to live through unimaginable traumatizing torture. Noto Shoujo comparatively is about what? The only statement of a theme comes in the ending, where Shigehiko, following becoming severely anemic after pledging himself to be Kirie's source of blood and pleasure as mutual lovers, runs into open traffic and ends up near death on the hospital bed. After recounting his full life story to Kirie, who snuck into the place, she decides he's just too damn irresistible and purposely injures herself to deliver him a bloody kiss, and thus infusing him with vampiric blood that makes him a vampire. Shigehiko becomes immortal and lives forever with Kirie. The end. In a normal romance novel, the messaging here would be that love is so powerful that it can even overcome death, and it feels like that's exactly what Noto Shoujo is both playing into and poking fun at. Love, after all, must conquer all in a story of romance, even the most improbable circumstances, as explained by author Gwen Hayes, who is in turn distilling the rules laid by the romance writers of America.
In a broad sense, all romance books are about one theme: love conquers all. Romance readers have genre expectations just like any other genre. The biggest of those expectations is the HEA, Happily Ever After, or the HFN, Happy for Now. If love doesn't conquer all at the end of your story, you didn't write a romance. You might have a great story with romantic elements, but if your characters don't have a happy resolution, then you need to find a different shelf for your finished book to live on.
While novels that are simply romantic aren't beholden to this, novels that are in the genre of romance must end like this, because it means that the reader is guaranteed to get a resolution for all their drama that makes them happy and keeps the idea of love's purity floating in their mind. And while it is a noble goal, an inspiring one even, it intersects a lot with how the definitions of love and goodness are worked by those with power. People are willing to excuse a lot in the name of love, because a lot has been codified in the culture and law that leads many topics of abuse to be at best divisive, and at worst systematically encouraged, and it's usually the worst, at least in the US. Men are encouraged to exert power over women as an act of love because depending on what scripture you read and what social groups you're around, they need brutal guidance. Christianity and its sects have misogyny and homophobia buried or sometimes screaming at you within their texts, and subsequent texts that have been canonized by some of those various sects, such as the Catholic Church, contain their own gluttony of issues which have, altogether, been used to justify mass atrocities in the past and the present, as well as everything else I've just talked about. It is impossible for spiritually foundational literature to have lines about smiting for God's might and women requiring submission without those concepts working their way into the broader society, even after marginal secularization. The way these ideas, unlike economics, trickle down from those with power to those without are part of what make power structures so insidious. Religious dogma, patriarchy, capitalism, authoritarianism, fascism, and so forth are as dangerous as they are, in part, for their ability to assimilate those who are oppressed into their ideology through overwhelming presence. Everything from our views on the exploitation of workers to what we believe is love and affection is colored by those in power around us and how they choose to distill those ideas through culture and politics. And for those people, this often means romanticizing acts of violence that explicitly benefit them at the cost of everybody else. They want it to be normalized so they can keep their power. This all affects art and our sexual desires in a myriad of ways, but there's two I want to tap into in particular. The first is that because this is normalized even among those who are oppressed by it, pop culture forms a loop where it accepts these harmful status quos and regurgitates them, thus strengthening them. This is how we end up with all the abuse and rape apology in books like 50 Shades, and why your average housewife sees the abuse in it as, at best, a bit exaggerated for funsies, and at worst, totally forgivable and normal. Many of them may have enough of a rebellious streak to consume lightly risque erotic fiction while their husband is away, but I doubt many within that group have enough of that spark to grasp how the ideas of consent and abuse passed on to them exist to control them. Authors and readers cannot fully escape the politics of the society they live under. All we can do is try to look elsewhere and grow as people, and while that can get us extremely far, we will always be ironing things out. Many don't even get as far as looking out the window to begin ironing things out. The second is that as we begin to understand these things are bad, they become forbidden and taboo, and people enjoy experimenting with taboos in safe environments, or even not safe ones, as some of the oldest stories in mankind prove. If we're talking about sex specifically, then in some contexts this is because there's a trauma associated with those acts that sex has the power to recontextualize into pleasure. In other cases, some people just enjoy a bit of spice in the bedroom. Context and framing matters not just for sex, but for everything social and personal. And I think for the most part, I've covered games on this channel that do a really good job at it despite a few hiccups here and there. Titles I cover which deal with abuse and toxicity in relationships do so in a way that creates interesting drama and friction, which is either ultimately resolved or left hanging in a way that is thought-provoking and explores everything in a topical and interesting manner. But I'm not at all blind to the fact that I review games in a genre which, despite the impressive amount of progressive works, is ultimately filled with titles that challenge nothing, that abide by the worst parts of our status quo. For every Suisenka that asks us to examine just what harm it is we're doing by forcing ourselves to try and abide by predetermined narratives, there are 10 big sellers that pander to otaku purity fantasies of love as an all-encompassing force. And guess who tends to get the most press and the most sales? I'm not saying art has a responsibility to impart good morals at every given turn, or even to impart morals. I play a lot of games that have absolutely no point beyond shooty shooty bang bang or pew pew cum cum because I don't know, I like it when the gun go burr and the booby go boink. But I hate thinking sometimes, and I don't know, I like dopamine, it feels good. But no art is immune to criticism and examination, not even the most thematically bereft, because all of it is created by people who are informed by the desires and wishes of the society they live in. I'm sure romance novelists who write dark, serious stories of violent women and manipulative men aren't doing so actively intending to excuse harm, but some of them do repeat harmful concepts ingrained by those in power to everyone below, and that's worth examining and questioning on a case-by-case basis. I won't pretend that Noto Shoujo is some grand refutation of this all. I think Kichijoji just wanted to write what they thought would be a fun dynamic and poke at how much we'll accept in romance stories while still cheering for the couple at the end. And truthfully, I am not immune to propaganda. I thought it was adorable in a really pathetic way when they kissed at the end. I hope they have a horrible life together. But what's interesting is that regardless of intent, everything from the basic framing of the story as otherworldly to how deranged each character is sends a message of abnormality and behavior of our main couple. It shows two people being awful in really familiar ways without consequence, and while I think I've outlined as to why that's interesting from a romantic context to examine as a way to reflect on toxicity from a safe distance, why does it work from a sexual perspective? I think for me, the answer lies in how it allows the main couple to do whatever they want without having to answer to the actual real-world complexities that surround sex, because, at least in the US and many other countries, it's stuck in a nightmare of our own creation. Even things that should be simple, like enthusiastic consent, are stifled by way of lobbying from right-wing pundits and decades of influence from puritanical religions, making it difficult for people to learn about what they might want and what enthusiasm looks like for them.
Consent, and its conceit of absolute clarity, places the burden of good sexual interaction on women's behavior, on what they want and on what they can know and say about their wants, on their ability to perform a confident sexual self in order to ensure that sex is mutually pleasurable and non-coercive. Woe betide she who does not know herself and speak that knowledge.
No always means no, but what about the meaning of yes in the world we live in? Is it fair to expect people who live in sexually aggressive societies to always be able to enthusiastically answer to what they want? Is it fair to expect people who live in that same society to always be able to explain what they don't want? As someone who has pretended to go along with a lot of sex for fear of repercussion or because I felt socially pressured to learn, I don't think any of that's fair. The discourse around consent without subsequent discourse around trauma and the way our systems of power influence our decision making is woefully incomplete, and no amount of detail in a Cosmopolitan article or a campus poster can make it whole. Education and free discussion about sex is the first step to changing things, but I don't see the consciousness of the US or other countries changing anytime soon in that regard, nor taking the next steps of challenging power en masse. Now, you might be saying, but Amelie, surely there's a field about sex that will give us education on this and help, and if you're saying that, you're correct. The sex-positive feminist literature provides a precious wealth of thought-provoking social examinations which help to make sense of how incomplete our understanding of sex within the society are. In particular, I found the writings of Mia Srivasan, Catherine Angel, and Audre Lorde massively informative during the production of this video. And that's it. That's all there exists on this. You know, it's just this one thing. There's nothing else. You're done. You're done. This segment is over. Okay, I have to talk about sexology for just a moment because I don't know when I'm going to get another opportunity to, and I have to bitch about what's been rotting my brain. It is this field, which is ostensibly supposed to be the study of sex, right? Is like half regurgitated evo-psych and half otherly awful original material, and I don't know how to cope with any of it except laughter and giving other people the brain rot. Hey everybody, Big Joel here. No. So I figured it's probably appropriate that I mentioned there are actually a lot of really cool people in the field of sexology nowadays, a lot of really, really cool people of color and feminist writers who are doing fantastic work and fantastic research. It's genuinely a neat field in a lot of ways. However, it is also one that still hasn't really progressed in some ways past what I'm about to mention, depending on who's writing. For example, Ray Blanchard is a noted transphobe who has caused immense havoc for trans people, and he is still very, very active in it, so, yeah, you should support cool people like some of the people that are on the screen and maybe avoid people like Blanchard or the people I'm about to mention who still fucking get cited for some reason. I don't know why. I hate science sometimes. Take, for instance, this excerpt from Sexual Conduct, one of the foundational texts of the field. In short, relatively few pre-adolescents become sexually active in accordance with an adult sexual script. That is truly sexually active. The seductive pre-adolescent female, for all her statistical rarity, may represent a significant adumberation of a more general pattern of psychosexual development, a process, especially among females, wherein there is a commitment to sociosexuality that precedes a commitment to the gratifications of sexual performance itself. The fact the author takes the time to describe in great detail the idea of real-world mesugaki, despite self-admitting they're a statistical rarity, I think speaks immensely to where their priorities lie. If the general veneer of trying to brush over adult-minor sexual relations as a nonchalant thing that just exists, as opposed to an act of child predation and abuse of power, doesn't give it away. And they're almost all like this. At least a quarter of girls reaching adolescence have been approached by older men, or perhaps even had direct sexual contact with them. By the time they're 17, nearly all girls have had such approaches made to them in one way or another. Such approaches are often harmless. Much as feminists may deplore it, appreciative whistles from strangers on the street or from truck drivers passing by are trivial. All of this is to say that for many of us, sex in reality is bound up in horrifying power structures, pseudoscience that seeks to justify abuse, an absence of discourse which intersects with other important discussions, and a severe lack of education in general, which makes it a challenge for most people to have any clear grasp of what they actually want or are getting into. And this is part of why I think erotic fiction matters. It can present a world where, for even just a brief moment, none of those things are important and don't feel like they need to be. Writers, no, really all artists, have the power to make ideas into tangible, shareable dreams which communicate something, changing them over and over to find exactly what it is they want to portray and want to do in a way that none of us are afforded in real time. Drafts can be painted over again and again as your work grows into something wonderful and true to your vision. Art is one of the safest ways to learn about what you want and who you are, because as an artist, you can change the very reality you've just constructed. As a participant, you can bail out of the dreams which are too much for you before they begin to overwhelm. And I think this is all why Noto Shoujo has stood out to me more than than any other nukige I've played exclusively from an executional perspective. I love games in the genre that have bigger themes than this, but there's something to be admired about a title which is so pure, striving only for love and drama and eros, yet does so much with such perfection that I never desired to bail despite my traumas that sometimes conflict with the kind of subject matter this game deals with. I had fun the entire way through. I was able to laugh at things I couldn't laugh at before, and I felt my head was a little bit clearer by the end, and not just because of the gallons that were spilled. Even if it wasn't Kichijoji's intention, this game got me thinking again about how much I get out of the ero part of eroge and how valuable it can be. It's something I tend to gloss over in my videos, but this game shows that, if done right, it in and of itself can be a powerful driving force for developing a world and characters, able to hoist even the most simple of stories up as something more than a consumable. And maybe more than that, it got me to think about how we discuss romance in society and our literature, how even someone like me that's highly critical and analytical of media can still, at the end of it all, cheer for the power of true love. Because in the same way a world where sex is not bound in man-made horrors is tantalizing, a world where love truly is a force of pure good is inspiring. They're beautiful, simple fantasies to be lost in for a time, and we all need to escape sometimes. And yet that simplicity not only makes them easy to repeat over and over again as narratives without thinking about what they're implying, but they also do no justice to how beautiful it is that love and sex are complex, challenging beasts. They're endless voids of discovery and possibility that we shouldn't fear for their vastness and how little we know, but love for how that vastness allows us to create our own meanings. There is just as much horror in there as there is beauty, and part of being human is learning to separate that with other people. Being human means communicating with others so we can understand ourselves better and find true enthusiasm. It means banding together to do whatever it is we can do to tear down the walls that prevent others from having that luxury. And among many other things, it means embracing the unknown on our own consenting terms rather than fearing it. At this point, I'd like to think I have a really good idea what I want for both my romantic and sexual lives, but I'm always open to learning. I used to be scared of expanding my rigid ideas, but reading and talking with others has led me to realize it's fun. And if love were some cosmic thing prescribed to us by the universe, I think it would diminish the meaning of this growth, this discovery, and that's sad to think about. It's a beautiful fantasy to be lost in for a time, but I think the way it's become the dominant conception of love in pop culture does a disservice to what I see as its true nature. Love is a fleeting, purely human emotion. It's no cosmic force that the universe wraps two people within, capable of healing and forgiving all, and after peering into a world that lays out all that fantasy entails, I like the reality. I like that the love which exists in humans is something that requires us to think to understand ourselves, to communicate with others in calm, caring terms to truly understand them, to accept that other feelings and desires exist in balance with it rather than subservience to it. I love that love has its own unique meaning and expression to me. I love the human love that I have, and not the kind that's meant only for the dreams of another world. Clocking in at just under 6 hours long, No Shoujo is by far one of the shortest games I've covered on this channel, made after the 1990s that also isn't Yami no Koei 1 or 2. And within that length, it manages to be fun, comedic, entrancing, titillating, and a shining example of just how even the most simple and pure of adult media can be elevated to lewd, beautiful, lascivious art through thoughtful and caring design in every element. No Shoujo might not be the deepest game ever made, but it's one that I adore. It's a title that I got far more out of than I expected to, and not only does that make my booby dicky loving monkey brain happy, but I think it also highlights why all pornography, at least that which isn't created for exploitation, is worth protecting. I've sworn numerous times that I wouldn't review games that are just porn, and yet here I am writing thousands upon thousands of words about how much fun I had of this experience and the kinds of thoughts it managed to make my brain conjure up. Doing these videos has forced me to reconcile with the fact that there is nothing which is just porn. None of it is so simple as something of pure eros that cannot tell us anything about our society, about our desires, about our culture, and about us, whether that is good or bad. All of this is why I think it's sad that, as I'm writing this, adult media is being engulfed in a frenzy of anti-expression censorship that threatens the ability for anybody to express their desires. Day by day, payment processors like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, and so forth are going after whoever and whatever they can to deny people access to adult media in pursuit of a venture filled by evangelical ideas of what is and isn't morally acceptable. Digital storefronts with explicitly adult pages like DL Site have lost direct support for credit cards, and platforms like Patreon have their regulations heavily influenced by what payment processors tell them. Some people say it's corporate suicide when these businesses stop accepting these payment methods, but I think that's wrong. It's an act of premeditated murder by corporations to wipe out those who disagree with them. And this isn't at all a new phenomena. There have always been forces banning against pornography on all sides of the political spectrum, but those who are doing so on the left, believing they're somehow protecting the rights of women and minorities, are, to paraphrase Ellen Willis, doing the dirty work of the good cops in our society. Quote, "Just cooperate," they say, crossing their fingers, "and we'll go easy on you," end quote. But there is no going easy. There is no acceptable expression of sex, of queerness, of anything that these people will accept. As it stands, all we can do is protest. We can fight, we can refuse to stay down, we can live. We can try wherever we can, however we can, to continue to create and talk, keep a buzz going around and find whatever avenues we can to pursue our work and our desires. Because no matter how simple or complex they may be, they mean something. Because sex matters.
Only now, I find more and more women-identified women brave enough to risk sharing the erotic's electrical charge without having to look away, and without distorting the enormously powerful and creative nature of that exchange. Recognizing the power of the erotic within our lives can give us the energy to pursue genuine change within our world, rather than merely settling for a shift of characters in the same weary drama. For not only do we touch our most profoundly creative source, but we do that which is female and self-affirming in the face of a racist, patriarchal, and anti-erotic society.